Long before Diana Spencer became a global image, she lived inside a much smaller, quieter story, one defined less by privilege than by instability. She was born into an aristocratic family whose history placed them near the British royal household but did not protect them from fracture. Her parents' marriage deteriorated early, and the breakdown was not handled gently. Diana was young when her mother left, young enough that the departure did not arrive as an explanation but as an absence. Years later, she would describe waiting, believing her mother would return. That belief lingered longer than anyone noticed. Boarding school followed, as it did for many children of her background, but Diana struggled there. Not academically in a dramatic sense, but quietly, consistently. She failed exams. She felt out of place. Teachers described her as kind, sensitive, and eager to please, but unsure of herself. These were not traits that attracted attention or admiration. They were traits that made someone adaptable, observant, and careful, qualities that would later be misread as weakness. When she moved to London in her late teens, Diana lived with friends and worked ordinary jobs, caring for children, assisting in kindergartens, moving through the city without protection or recognition. She was not preparing for public life. She was surviving adulthood one small step at a time, learning how to read people, how to anticipate moods, how to make herself useful. These skills were learned early and unconsciously, shaped by a childhood in which emotional safety was unpredictable. Her first encounters with Prince Charles were brief and unremarkable. She was 16. He was older, already burdened by expectations he did not choose. Years later, when their paths crossed again, the circumstances were different. Charles was under intense pressure to marry. The courtship was short, formal, and observed. Diana later said she felt swept along by momentum rather than choice. She was 19 when she agreed to marry the heir to the throne. Very little was explained to her about what that would actually mean. Even during the engagement, small moments unsettled observers. Diana appeared nervous. Charles appeared distant. When asked whether they were in love, the answer did not reassure. At the time, it was treated as an awkward phrase. In hindsight, it sounded like a warning. The wedding in July 1981 was framed as a beginning, but for Diana it functioned as a closing. Once she walked into Westminster Abbey, anonymity was gone permanently. Millions watched as she became a symbol, but symbols are rarely consulted about their own shape. Diana was aware of her anxiety that day. She later admitted she felt overwhelmed, physically ill, and uncertain, but uncertainty had no place in the narrative being built around her. The omission of the word obey from her vows was widely celebrated as modern and progressive, yet within the monarchy it was recorded, remembered, and filed away. The institution does not respond loudly to deviation. It responds over time. On the honeymoon, the emotional distance became unmistakable. Charles remained attached to a life Diana could not enter. Letters, gifts, and habits connected him to Camilla Parker Bowles in ways Diana was never meant to replace. Inside the marriage, Diana began to unravel. She developed bulimia, sometimes purging several times a day. She engaged in self-harm during periods of despair. These were not public acts, and they were not cries for attention. They were responses to an environment where distress was seen as inconvenience. Requests for help were often misunderstood or minimized. The palace had protocols, not therapies. Publicly, Diana learned to perform. She smiled. She waved. She wore clothes that communicated warmth rather than authority. The press responded instantly. She photographed well. She appeared accessible. She looked as though she noticed people. That perception became her power, and her problem. Inside the palace, admiration from the public did not translate into influence. It translated into discomfort. What the public interpreted as a fairy tale was, in practice, a closed system with little room for negotiation. Diana did not fail to adapt because she was incapable. She failed because the role was not designed for emotional transparency. And transparency was becoming her defining trait. Motherhood shifted Diana's position in subtle but important ways. With the births of William and Harry, she gained something the institution could not easily dismiss: moral authority. She refused to raise her children at a distance. She took them to schools, amusement parks, hospitals. She hugged them publicly. These actions were interpreted as warmth by the public and disruption by the palace. At the same time, Diana's charitable work began to diverge sharply from tradition. She did not limit herself to appearances. She sat with people others avoided. She touched patients with AIDS when fear still dominated public understanding. She listened rather than delivered speeches. Later, she walked through landmine fields, wearing protective gear but refusing distance. These were not symbolic gestures. They were physical acts that challenged the boundaries between power and vulnerability. The press followed her everywhere. Diana resented the intrusion but also understood its leverage. She learned how to redirect attention toward causes rather than ceremony. This made her increasingly independent, and independence within a rigid system is often interpreted as threat. Her marriage was functionally over by the mid-1980s. Charles resumed his relationship with Camilla openly in private. The media framed the story as a personal drama, but the deeper conflict was structural. Diana no longer fit the institution, but she could not leave it cleanly. She existed in between, too visible to ignore, too unpredictable to control. By the early 1990s, secrecy became unsustainable. Recorded conversations surfaced. Biographies appeared. The public learned more than the palace intended. Diana's 1995 BBC Panorama interview was not explosive because of what she said, but because of how calmly she said it. She spoke of bulimia, loneliness, and betrayal without theatricality. The now famous line, "There were 3 of us in this marriage," did not accuse. It stated a fact. At the time, the interview was seen as a moment of agency. Years later, the revelation that the journalist had used forged documents to gain Diana's trust recontextualized everything. What had looked like empowerment was also manipulation. Diana had already believed she was being watched, undermined, and excluded. The deception confirmed her fears and deepened her isolation. After the interview, Diana's position became precarious. She was separated from the monarchy but still bound to it. She was admired but not protected. When the divorce was finalized in 1996, she lost her royal title but gained freedom that came without structure. She stepped back from many charities and focused on fewer causes. She moved more openly, more visibly. The protective buffer of the institution was gone, but the attention remained. In 1997, Diana entered a transitional period. A private relationship with heart surgeon Hazat Khan had ended quietly. Her relationship with Dodi Fayed unfolded publicly. Cameras followed them across the Mediterranean. The logistics of movement changed. Privacy became something to escape rather than expect. On the night of August 30th to 31st in Paris, the pursuit intensified. Diana and Dodi left the Ritz Hotel in a Mercedes driven by Henri Paul, later found to be heavily intoxicated. Paparazzi followed. The car entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at high speed and crashed. Dodi Fayed and Henri Paul died instantly. Diana was alive when emergency services arrived. She was treated at the scene according to French protocol, stabilized, and transported to hospital, where she later died from internal injuries. The timeline was examined immediately. The shock was global. The demand for meaning was immediate. Investigations followed, thorough and costly. French authorities concluded the crash was caused by speed and intoxication. British authorities conducted Operation Paget, examining allegations of conspiracy in exhaustive detail. A British inquest later ruled that Diana and Dodi were unlawfully killed through grossly negligent driving. No evidence of assassination was found. And yet doubt persisted, not because evidence was missing, but because acceptance was difficult. Diana's death felt disproportionate. The randomness resisted narrative closure. Public mourning reached a scale rarely seen. The monarchy hesitated, then adapted. The Queen spoke. The funeral was watched by over 1 billion people. Diana was buried privately. Time passed. Her sons grew older. Her image softened into legacy. But the story never fully settled, not because of unanswered questions, but because it revealed something enduring: how systems absorb individuals, how attention can both elevate and endanger, and how difficult it is to accept that even the most watched lives can end through ordinary failures. Princess Diana's mystery is not who caused her death. It is why her presence made so many people feel seen, and why losing her felt like losing evidence that compassion could survive inside power. That is why the story continues to be told. Not to uncover secrets, but because something unresolved remains, not in the facts, but in the way people remember her, and in what her life quietly exposed. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and like for more amazing stories on our channel. See you soon.